We're talking about the Christian right in America. Everybody knows how powerful they are. You all know about the impact with millions of followers, evangelicals, conservative Christians, the ones who helped to re-elect Bush, who we all know is an openly religious president, or at least claims to be. I believe he even said God called on him to be the president. And the Christian right, no doubt, has a big influence on American politics. But could it get even more powerful, and what could be done with that power? Tonight we've got a guy who compares part of the Christian right to fascism. His name is Hedges. Won a Pulitzer Prize for his writing. We'll talk to him in a moment. But first, what is fascism? Chances are, when you hear the word fascism, well, you think of this guy, Hitler and his Nazi regime. Or maybe it's Mussolini, the fascist dictator of Italy. Or even General Francisco Franco of Spain. Fascism is a loaded word that can mean different things to different people. Authoritarianism, nationalism, absolute military power, state propaganda, or censorship. But no matter how you define it, they're words not to be used lightly. But now there's a new book that argues a fascist movement is underway today in the United States, and it's being driven by a part of the Christian right, preachers like Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson. The book is called American Fascists, the Christian Right and the War on America. You saw that name there. You saw the name on the bottom. Hedges, the man who wrote the book, former foreign correspondent for the Times of New York, has more than 20 years' experience covering wars and conflicts around the world. And now I guess he's covering what he calls another type of war, which is the Christian right's war on America. By the way, Hedges grew up studying the Bible. Graduate of the Harvard Divinity School. I think your father was even a Presbyterian minister. Nice to see you, man. How are you?
Thank you. Good.
Welcome. I mean, you got to know, man, when you name a book American Fascists, and you're talking about a certain segment of the Christian right, that you're going to generate a lot of controversy. So let's just start. How do you define fascism in this context?
Well, I begin the book with a short list written by the writer Umberto Eco, where he lists what he thinks are the 14 points of eternal fascism or fascism, that cult of masculinity, that war against modernism, that war against truth, that obsession with apocalyptic violence as a purging agent or cleansing agent, to make the world pure and usher in the utopia. And I think when you look closely at the ideology of the radical Christian right, those so-called Christians in the United States who want to create a Christian state, in generic terms, they're fascist. Certainly fascism conjures up historical images, as you saw, pictures of Mussolini or Hitler, but it is an ideological belief system. And that's certainly the argument of the book, that this has been a dangerous mutation. These are not traditional evangelicals. They're not traditional fundamentalists who have always called on followers to remove themselves from the contaminants of secular society, to shun political power. Evangelical leaders like Billy Graham always talked about not getting too close to power, and he himself was used and burned by Richard Nixon. This is a dangerous and radical mutation. It is about creating, using the iconography and language of Christianity to create an authoritarian, or I think arguably a fascist state.
Now, as you said there, you're not talking about all of the right-wing Christians. This is a select group of people you're talking about?
Yeah, they're more properly called dominionists.
Oh,
I mean,
the Bible verse.
We use the old terms. Yeah, I mean, we use the old term evangelical. They're not evangelicals. What they want is something very different. They want to legislate their narrow morality. They want to usher in a non-reality-based belief system. That's what creationism is about. It's mythology. I mean, America has become the only industrialized nation in the world that argues about the validity of evolution. And we now have creationism, which no scientist at all supports or believes has any validity, being taught in public schools.
But people believe in that, I suspect, and that's why it is that way.
People do believe in it, but of course it's not. The purpose of evolution, or the purpose of creation, is not to offer an alternative to evolution. The purpose of creationism is to destroy the possibility of dispassionate, honest, intellectual, and scientific inquiry. It is to make facts interchangeable with opinion. It is to make lies true. And that is a dangerous precedent to set, because then you are allowed to view the world and the reality around you through this distorted ideological prism. That's what's being done. It's a war against truth. It's a war against real intellectual inquiry. It's a war against science. And that, of course, is a fundamental component to the fascist state or the totalitarian state.
President Bush, who is the poster boy for religious power, is he a part of this movement in your estimation?
Well, he's clearly a bridge, because he comes out of what you have is an uneasy alliance between American corporatism, which funds much of the Christian right, and these true believers. And at times they come in conflict. Bush, of course, comes out of the American oligarchy, yet at the same time was born again. But he's not himself, I think, now having lived with a man for 6 years, his shallowness is on public display. He's more of a figurehead. He's more, I think you said poster boy. That's probably exactly what he is. He's certainly not a leader. He's certainly not an ideologue. He's a puppet. He's not the puppet master.
Okay, now, in order for, what I want to know about the fascist movement, the reason why the fascist movement was frightening with the Italians back then and frightening with Hitler and the Nazis is because they were actually in power.
Right.
There really doesn't seem to be the same sort of environment in place in America today that would allow that to take place.
Well, and that's a very good point, because in order for these movements to take power, they need a prolonged period of instability or crisis. And we don't have it. However, another catastrophic terrorist attack, which I spent a year of my life covering Al-Qaeda for the New York Times, all intelligence officials that I interviewed and my colleagues interviewed described as inevitable, an economic meltdown. I covered the war in Yugoslavia. The war in Yugoslavia was caused by the economic collapse of Yugoslavia that gave rise to these demagogues, not ancient ethnic hatreds. Or a series of environmental disasters could usher in a period of instability that would allow this movement to come to power. And remember that there are tens of millions of people in the United States, as there are increasing numbers of people in Canada who've been completely disenfranchised with the flight of manufacturing jobs and have fallen into a level of despair, which you've not seen in Canada because you still have health insurance and provincial and state assistance programs that we've gutted. And these people, in their despair and their rage, have turned to a world where they're offered magic and angels and Jesus will walk with them, and they've been ripe for manipulation by these demagogues.
Right, but ultimately isn't the responsibility theirs? Because Pat Robertson can go on TV and talk to everybody, and of the 50 million who watch him, or however many it is, not everybody looks at it and says, you're right. It's really up to the people to decide.
It's not completely up to the people. I interviewed a lot of followers and they're not. A lot of the followers are not bad people. They're actually good people and earnest people. But the stories of their lives were such. They had fallen into such deprivation, either sort of emotional deprivation or economic deprivation, that they weren't coping in the real world. And their communities had physically disintegrated. If you go up to places like the former manufacturing centers in the Rust Belt in Ohio, the end times is not an abstraction to these people. They have seen their world obliterated. They can't get jobs that they could get 20, 30 years ago, where they could make $50 an hour, where they got benefits, where they had a future, and they know their children will never get jobs like that. And that has pushed them. We as Americans, as a society, have abandoned these people. And I'm talking about the Democratic and the Republican Party. And in a sense, it's that despair and that the self-destructive world that they now live in. There are parts of the United States that look like the developing world. And unless we reach out to those people and reincorporate them, they are perfect fodder for people who offer them that walk with me, Jesus.
Well, your dad was a minister. You went to divinity school at no small school at Harvard. I want to know, what's your relationship with your faith now like, and how difficult was this journey for you?
Well, not difficult at all. I think there's a lot of anger in the book. Because I did grow up in the church and because I'm biblically literate, I think I'm more attuned to how they distort the Bible, misrepresent the Bible, and often fabricate much of the Bible to support positions of bigotry against gays, for instance, against liberals, intellectuals. They are one of the most intolerant mass movements we've seen in American history, and probably the most dangerous mass movement. And I think that that's a key, because I come out of the church and because, the Bible has been, something that I heard before I could read, I think I'm aware of what it is they're looking for and what it is they want.
So this is not necessarily about the religion, but more about the interpretation from a small group is what you're saying.
Right. And in the end, I consider myself religious. I think these people, they talk about acculturating American society with a Christian faith. They've acculturated the Christian faith with American imperialism and American capitalism.
Now, before we let you go, to sort of go off this, during your research, you actually attended some sort of event where they cured homosexuals, and with the Ted Haggard story coming out today. What was that experience like? What happened?
Well, this is, they can cure, they purport to be able to cure what they call same-sex attraction. And this is just, incredibly cruel. Because what it has done is essentially left gay Americans completely bereft, completely alone. And of course, we know, among teenagers, gay suicide is 2 or 3 times higher than it is among heterosexuals. It has been an attempt to strip people they have defined as social deviants of their rights. And of course, when they finish with those social deviants, they'll turn on the rest of us.
There you go. Chris Hedges, American Fascist is the book. Thanks for your time, man.
Thanks, Joe.
We appreciate that.